Hi everyone, this is Hana. Before we dive into today's topic, I have a quick update about the situation in South Korea. Finally, Yoon Suk-yeol, the former president who declared martial law and attempted a military coup on December 3rd, 2024, was sentenced to life in prison for treason a few days ago. The special prosecutor had originally asked for the death penalty. So a lot of Korean citizens are actually quite disappointed with the life sentence. But this is not the end. He still has 7 more trials waiting for him. The charges include using fake public opinion polls during his presidential campaign, creating illegal campaign funds, spreading false information, and sending drones to North Korea to provoke a war and use it as an excuse for martial law. Along with this, there is something amazing news. Scholars from the global political science community have officially nominated the entire population of South Korea for the Nobel Peace Prize. Whether we win it or not, I feel incredibly proud as a Korean citizen. We stood up against heavily armed soldiers, and for over 6 months, we held nonviolent, peaceful protest every single day during the entire process of impeaching and arresting the president. I truly hope this gives a strength and courage to other countries going through their own crisis of democracy. Now, let's get into today's topic. Okay, a crowded subway on the way to work. An announcement says the train is delayed for 10 minutes because of a disability right protest. The air in the train instantly gets sharp. Someone clicks their tongue and mutters, "Do they really have to do this during rush hour?" Some people take photos and video of the protest, share them on social media, and don't hesitate to leave hateful and mocking comments. This is another scene. A nice, comfortable cafe on a weekend. A mom walks in carrying her baby. The baby gets scared of the new place and starts to cry. A young person working on a laptop openly frowns at them. It's the exact same thing on the train. Their face clearly says, "I paid to be here. Why do I have to put up with this noise?" It's a silent protest. We are living in an era full of victims. People without disabilities are angry that the protests violate their right to move. Others feel it's unfair that a crying baby took away their right to quiet. Men feel feminism is taking away their piece of the pie. Locals believe immigrant workers are threatening their jobs. At the bottom of all this massive frustration lies a painful truth by Franklin Leonard. When you are assumed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Actually, Franklin Leonard wasn't the first to say this. But as a Hollywood film producer and the founder of the Blacklist, when people demanded more racial and gender diversity in the white male-dominated film industry, the establishment pushed back, called it a reverse discrimination. That's when he used this quote to give them a wake-up call. Because they have enjoyed the benefits of the mainstream for so long, they think of those benefits as their natural rights. So when society tries to share the pie and move toward equality, they mistakenly think they are being unfairly oppressed. It was a sharp and perfect point. Just like a fish doesn't notice the water, to the mainstream people, privilege is transparent, like air. Running up the stairs, walking into a cafe freely as an adult, walking down a dark street as a man without feeling afraid. All of these are not personal skills. They are infrastructure and privileges granted by society. But they mistake these transparent benefits for universal rights. So when the weak struggle to fix the tilted playing field, they don't say it as a step forward equality. They say it as an oppression and reverse discrimination that steals what is rightfully theirs. The bigger problem is when people dress up this hate as being cool or intellectual. They use fragments of facts completely out of context to attack the weak. It's the fact that your protest may be late, right? It's the fact that your baby is loud, right? They feel proud of themselves for being rational and not emotional. I'm sorry, but that is not intellect. It is just a lack of empathy where the ability to imagine other people's pain has faded away. When a society loses its philosophy and humanities, intellectual laziness takes its place. It is nothing but cowardice hiding behind a mask, being cool. When I was young, my dad's motto was, never be a nuisance to others. It was meant to be a warm lesson about respecting the community. But today, it feels like that phrase has twisted into a weapon to choke the weak. What's the real definition of a nuisance? Using your transparent privilege as a weapon to block the survivor of the weak. That arrogance is the real nuisance. Going out in a wheelchair or a baby crying in a restaurant is just a natural part of every life. It can never be a nuisance. How do we become so cold? I look for the answers in the time we have lived through. I belong to the Genial generation, the bridge between Gen X and Gen Z. I remember the romance of Hongdae clubs and the warmth of the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I'm the last generation to remember that. At the same time, when the massive IMF financial crisis hit in 1997, we were the first ones swept away. We were called the 880,001 generation, the surplus generation, and the first generation to be poorer than our parents. Before the IMF, South Korea had a clear sense of offline community. If a baby cried on a bus, a lady sitting next to them offering a candy was a natural virtue. But in the 1990s, the world was already going through a massive earthquake. After the Cold War, capitalism won, and it covered the whole world under the name of neoliberalism. Infinite competition, corporate privatization, open financial markets, and fixable labor. This Washington consensus was forced as the only right answer and became the absolute global standard. When South Korea faced a national bankruptcy in 1997, we had no choice but to ride this massive wave. Our national dollar safe was completely empty. The IMF held a lifeline, and in return for lending us money, they demanded brutal and extreme restructuring. It was a one-way order to dismantle the Korean economy overnight and to inject Western free market rules deep into our bones. Having lost our economic sovereignty, we had to helplessly accept massive layoffs and a huge rise in temporary workers. So completely against our will, the monster of neoliberalism began to rule our lives. This brutal system instantly stole our neighbors away from us, leaving only competitors and consumers in their place. Inside this neoliberal system, humans are not treated as dignified beings. A train ticket is no longer a right to use community transportation. It becomes a product you buy for your own comfortable space and time. From this consumer's point of view, a crying baby or a disabled person in a wheelchair is clearly a defective product that ruins the quality of the service. The anger of, I paid for this, why do I have to put up with a defective product, is no longer a request from a citizen of a community. It disguised itself as a legitimate consumer complaint. Especially the gaslighting our generation faced, like youth is supposed to be painful, added fear to this anger. Growing up hearing if you're poor is because you didn't try hard enough, we have constantly suffered from the fear of survivor, believing we will be left behind if we can't prove our worth. This tiny comfort I got by working my bones off, a train seat, a cafe table, whatever, we just can't stand it when people who seem to lack effort, the weak, invade it. In short, the hate in our society today is our trauma of every man for himself. It has twisted into aggression towards others and burst out like a scream. In this flow, the way Generation Z acts is very interesting and paradoxical. They have two faces at the same time, which older generations find hard to understand. On the night of the December 3rd martial law in South Korea, when the military surrounded the National Assembly and democracy was being crushed, the ones who poured out into the square were Gen Z. Instead of Molotov cocktails, they held K-pop light sticks, happily singing and dancing as they protested. The Kisses protesters, covered in space blankets, guarding the snowy square, fought back with noble determination. To stop the collapse of the system democracy that holds their future, they showed more passionate solidarity than anyone else. But ironically, those exact same young people are the coldest when drawing a line against the weak in subways or cafes. They react sharply, saying, "Don't violate my rights." It's not because they have split personalities. They were born without ever experiencing a community. They are a generation that had to survive endless competition in a digital jungle. If we apply sociologist Zygmunt Bauman's concept of liquid modernity here, the puzzle of a paradox starts to make a little bit sense. The solidarity of past generations was solid, built on strong ideology and organizations. But Gen Z solidarity gathers strictly around a specific issue, and once the goal is reached, it scatters instantly, just like a liquid. The December 3rd martial law was a clear villain that was destroying their foundation of survivor, a fair and predictable system. So they were able to unite instantly and explosively. To them, the scare wasn't a place for some grand ideological battle to be won. It was more like a practical, sensible, short-term project to protect their everyday lives tomorrow. But dealing with the micro inconveniences in daily life, like a crying baby in a cafe or a wheelchair protest on the morning commute, is a completely different dimension. Social psychology finds the reason for their everyday coldness in empathy fatigue and cognitive overload. Born exposed to global tragedies and a flood of information 24/7 through their smartphones, this digital native generation is already psychologically suffering from severe empathy overload. They are completely drained. Plus, for those who have to pour all their limited mental energy into endless competition and surviving on their own, everyday tolerance, like waiting for someone's immaturity or sharing the inconvenience of the weak, has become an incredibly expensive emotional labor and a luxury. In the end, that sharp line they draw in subways and cafes is not just a simple malice towards others. It is a sad defense mechanism to protect their already exhausted selves. Honestly, I see my past self in them, the self I wanted to run away from. When I graduated from college in Korea and was fiercely surviving the working world, I felt the exact same defense mechanism working inside me. I had a wake-up call and a sense of crisis. If I keep living like this, I'll return into a monster. Eventually, I quit my decent job and left Korea. For the next 10 years, I wandered the ocean as a diving instructor in foreign countries, interacting with people all over the world with completely different culture and mindsets. I tried hard to rebuild my lost tolerance muscles. Only by looking at Korean society from the outside, I could finally see it clearly and objectively, include myself. We want to protect the forest called democracy, but we feel an unbearable fatigue when a single tree right next to us blocks our path. This is the sad paradox that Genji is showing and the one I once went through. It's not just our daily lives that have gone numb. In the face of massive evils happening all over the world right now, we are becoming more and more helpless. Korea recently went through the December 3rd martial law and the Seoul court riot. In the US, ICE uses illegal immigration as an excuse to commit crimes against humanity, separating children from their parents and locking them in cages. They even raided a battery plant construction site in Georgia and committed the outrage of forcefully detaining hundreds of Korean workers, chaining them up like animals. Turns out their documents have no problems at all. So hundreds of Korean victims are suing the United States. The US is pressuring and threatening the world with tariff violence, which was recently ruled illegal by the US Supreme Court, and completely ignoring another country's sovereignty, they forcefully kidnapped the sitting president of Venezuela. Is that all? Big tech CEOs in Silicon Valley used to shout about utopia, promising to solve world hunger and human rights issues once they became billionaires. Now, with massive capital, they collude with the governments to build a surveillance system to control their own citizens. It's a world where they even mock democracy if it gets in the way of their endless business. Add to this the Epstein files, exposing the white mainstream elite's global network of underage human trafficking and sexual exploitation. The endless Ukraine-Russia war, the genocide in Gaza live streamed to the entire world, and the world leaders gather at the Board of Peace, planning to build a resort right on the top of massacre site. In the past, any of these would have turned the world upside down. But we just react coldly saying we had a martial law attempt, so what? War happens every day. A superpower can do whatever it wants. Why is that? This isn't just a Korean phenomenon. The whole world is the same. Let's think back to before we became a hyper-connected internet society, before global social media took over our 24 hours. Back then, the size of the world we perceive was just our neighborhood, our school, and our local community network. In that small physical space, only a manageable amount of emotion flowed, which the human brain could process without trouble. We had the time and feelings to fully invest in ourselves. And the affection, compassion, and deep empathy we gradually gave to others was alive and breathing. But now the horrific tragedies of the entire world pour into the palm of our hands every single day. Psychologist Paul Slovik's theory of psychic numbing pinpoints this observed phenomenon exactly. As the saying goes, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is statistics. When the scale of violence crosses a limit and massive evils pour in daily, the human brain completely turns off its moral switch to protect itself. In overwhelming helplessness, even the death of 60,000 people in Gaza or the human rights of workers in chains just degrade into abstract numbers or superpower news. What adds fuel to the fire is how we consume these tragedies. In her book Regarding the Pain of Others, Susan Sontag sharply warned about how a hyperconnected society consumes tragedy. On a 6-inch smartphone screen, the horrors of a bombed Gaza or the cries of children locked in the cage away from their parents are processed as the exact same pixel spectacle as a Netflix drama or a short on YouTube or Instagram. With a single swipe, we flip through horrific tragedies. By hitting like or leaving a brief angry comments, we fool ourselves into thinking, I have fulfilled my moral duty as a citizen. This is exactly the moral paralysis that power and capital want the most. Normalizing massive violence to endless raise the public's anger threshold. Trapping that anger inside a smartphone screen to make us helpless. Clicking our tongues for a moment at the pain of the weak, but eventually locking our own doors and becoming cynical, saying, the world is naturally cruel anyway. The world won't change anyway. While we remain helplessly silent in front of the giant evils we should actually be angry at, we pour out that suppressed anger and exhaustion on the easy targets, the weak in our daily lives. And while we point our blades at each other, massive power and surveillance capitalism feed on that very soil of indifference and cynicism and take root in the most comfortable way. When a society gets sick, the first ones to be attacked are always the weakest links. Like a canary in a coal mine, the first to detect the toxicity of society and fall down are women. A society that hates women will soon hunt down the LGBTQ plus community, the elderly, the disabled, immigrant workers, and the poor one by one. And at the very end of that line, there are always children. A society that refuses to protect children, a society that defines a baby's cry as a noise pollution, is a society with no future. I think we need to rewrite Socrates' famous quote now, know yourself is not enough. What we need right now is the wake-up call, know your privilege. When you walk up the subway stairs on your own 2 feet, you must realize that someone else is in despair right in front of those stairs. When you drink coffee in a quiet cafe, you must be aware that someone is wandering the streets because they have nowhere to go with their child. Feminist philosopher Eva Feder-Kitai said this, we are all dependent beings born from a mother. The other privilege we are enjoying right now is something we gained because when we were babies, when we were sick, when we are immature, society patiently endured our crying and waited for us. We didn't grow up all by ourselves. When another tolerates a crying baby on a train, it is not charity or mercy we are giving to the child. It is simply paying back the debt we received from society during our childhood. That hot energy we showed waving light sticks in the square during the December 3rd martial law, I think we now need to let that flow down to the lowest places of our everyday lives. Just as important as protecting the giant forest of democracy is protecting the place of a single small bird trembling inside that forest. Our society should be a place where strict law and justice work on the big issues, while warm case and solidarity for every weak breed in the small things. And you and I have to build that kind of society. I think we must stop this selective justice where we can't even get angry at giant evils, but act so cruel to the weak. We must constantly ask ourselves whose exclusion my comfort stands on and whose forced silence paid for the quietness I'm enjoying. Let's get uncomfortable again. Let's make our numb heart beat again. What we have lost is not the right to quiet, but simply human decency. In the end, the temperature of how we react to other people's pain determines the safety of the world we live in. Because you and I too will grow old, get sick, and become weak one day. Okay, this has been Hana's Island. If you connected with my video, please support me with a like and subscribe. And let's meet here again next time. Welcome to Hana's Island. You're safe here now. Until then, stay comfortable on your own latitude. Take care. Bye.